What happens when a billionaire walks into his own bank disguised as a poor man, not for fame, not for attention, but to test the hearts behind the counters? What will the arrogant manager do when the man he humiliated yesterday returns in a limousine today? Can power expose pride, and can money ever measure character? In a world obsessed with wealth, one test will reveal the only truth that matters. Respect costs nothing. If you loved this story of power, pride, and redemption, hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more cinematic stories that challenge hearts, twist expectations, and leave you questioning what true worth really means. The morning sun poured a golden sheen over the city, but Ethan Blackwood stepped out of his Rolls-Royce as though he carried a storm within him. He stood there for a moment, his reflection shimmering in the car's polished door. Then, quietly, he removed his Rolex, folded his cashmere blazer, and replaced it with a faded denim jacket. His chauffeur watched in confusion as Ethan slipped on worn-out shoes and tucked an old envelope beneath his arm. When he turned toward the towering marble building at the end of the street, the city's most prestigious private bank, his face carried no trace of wealth or authority. Only calm determination. He wanted the truth today, raw, unfiltered, and seen from the ground. Rumors had reached him that the staff at his bank treated the poor like inconvenience and the rich like royalty. He had built his empire on fairness, but how could he trust numbers and reports when the real test of character lived in how people treated those with nothing? A few minutes later, the glass doors of the bank slid open, and the scent of polished floors and air conditioning hit him. Inside, everything gleamed, from the marble counters to the smiles aimed at expensive suits. A man in a navy blue suit greeted a wealthy-looking couple with syrupy charm, his voice smooth and professional. That was Mr. Collins, the branch manager. His handshake was firm, his grin wide, his eyes calculating. Ethan waited near the queue, clutching his envelope. When his turn came, he stepped forward, his tone polite, humble. "Good morning, sir. I'd like to open a savings account if possible." Mr. Collins barely glanced up from his computer. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, sir. I was told I could walk in." Collins sighed as though Ethan had asked him to lift a mountain. "We're a private bank. Minimum deposits start at 20,000. His eyes finally lifted, scanning Ethan's torn jeans, frayed cuffs, and the dust on his shoes. His expression twisted. "I'm afraid this isn't a charity. Try the community bank down the street." Ethan smiled gently. "I understand, but I do have a small amount to start with. I can bring more later." Collins leaned back, smirking. "Sir, we don't open accounts for—" He paused, searching for the right insult. "For people without financial stability. You wouldn't even afford our service charges." A few clerks nearby exchanged glances. One of them, a young woman with nervous eyes, whispered, "Maybe we should help him, sir." Collins shot her a glare sharp enough to silence her. "I decide who we help." The poor man nodded slowly, his calmness almost unsettling. "Thank you for your time," Ethan said softly, his voice kind but firm. He slid the envelope onto the counter. "Perhaps you can at least deposit this?" Collins opened it, expecting small change. Inside lay a check, blank but signed, no name, no amount. He frowned. "What is this supposed to be?" "Just a test," Ethan murmured, smiling faintly. "What?" "Nothing," Ethan said, taking back the envelope with gentle fingers. "I'll be back tomorrow," Collins scoffed. "Yes, do come back. Maybe when you've found a real job." Ethan turned and walked away without another word. The young clerk who'd tried to speak looked at him with quiet sympathy, but even she didn't know the truth of who had just left. Outside, the wind tugged at Ethan's jacket as he walked back down the street. The Rolls-Royce waited in the distance, gleaming beneath the afternoon sun. The driver looked puzzled when his employer climbed in, still dressed like a laborer. "Sir, was everything all right?" Ethan's reflection met his own in the tinted glass. His eyes were calm, but beneath them simmered something deeper. Not anger, but disappointment. "It was revealing," he said quietly. "More than I expected." The car rolled forward, gliding past people rushing with coffee cups and phones, unaware that one of the world's most powerful men had just been dismissed like a beggar. As the city blurred by, Ethan closed his eyes, remembering every word, every sneer. Tomorrow, he thought, They'll see who they were talking to. He opened his eyes again, the faintest trace of a smile curving his lips. The skyline glittered like coins in sunlight, but all he saw were faces, arrogant ones, careless ones. His voice, barely above a whisper, carried the weight of decision. Tomorrow the bank's true owner will return, he said to himself, but not in rags. Morning light streamed through the tall windows of Blackwood Manor, washing over shelves lined with books, awards, and photos of charity hospitals built under the Blackwood Foundation. In the quiet of his study, Ethan sipped his coffee while watching a small monitor replay yesterday's footage, the moment Mr. Collins sneered and dismissed him. Each frame of that encounter burned deeper than the last. His chief of staff, Victoria Hayes, stood by the door holding a tablet loaded with reports. "Sir, the team's been saying you're taking this a bit far," she said carefully. "You don't need to walk into your own bank dressed like a janitor to prove a point." Ethan didn't look away from the screen. "Numbers tell you profit," he said evenly. "But they don't tell you respect." He paused, zooming in on Collins's smirk. "If my people are humiliating customers, we've already lost more than money." Victoria sighed. "Still, you could have sent auditors." He smiled faintly. "Auditors get rehearsed greetings. I wanted the truth unmasked." He leaned back in his chair. "You can't lead people you don't understand, Victoria. And you can't understand them until you stand where they do." His words hung heavy in the silence. Outside, gardeners tended to manicured lawns that stretched like a private park. Inside, walls of art and steel whispered the story of a man who had clawed his way up from poverty to power and had never forgotten the taste of disrespect. He switched off the monitor and rose. "It's time to see how deep this rot goes. Prepare an internal audit team, but quietly. And schedule an unannounced inspection at the downtown branch today." Victoria nodded, already tapping on her tablet. "And the manager?" Ethan's gaze hardened. "Mr. Collins will meet me again, but this time he'll recognize who he's speaking to." At that very moment inside the bank, Collins was holding court near the main counter. He was laughing with two senior tellers, telling the story of that beggar who thought he could open an account. "I mean, the nerve," he said, adjusting his tie. "This is a private bank. We don't cater to peasants with dreams." One teller chuckled, another looked uneasy. The young woman from yesterday, the same one who had tried to help Ethan, kept her head down. "You did right, sir," said one of the tellers. "These people just waste our time." Collins smirked proudly. "That's how you keep the place clean. Only serious money walks through that door." He didn't notice the small security camera above him blinking red, a discreet upgrade recently added by headquarters to monitor staff-client interactions. The lens watched him the way karma watches arrogance, patiently. Moments later, a convoy of black sedans pulled up outside the bank. From the first car stepped Victoria, crisp in a dark suit, flanked by two assistants carrying briefcases embossed with the company insignia, Blackwood Holdings. The receptionist's jaw nearly dropped. "Ma'am, can I help you?" "Yes," Victoria replied. "We're here on behalf of headquarters. This branch is undergoing an emergency audit effective immediately." Within minutes, murmurs rippled through the building. Employees scrambled to adjust files, smile wider, speak softer. Collins straightened his tie, forcing a polite grin as he approached. "An audit? We weren't notified." "That's the point of an audit," Victoria said coolly. "Where's your private office?" "Mr. Blackwood may join us shortly." The color drained from Collins's face. Mr. Blackwood?" he stammered. "The chairman?" "Yes." She glanced at her watch. "He'll be here any moment." Collins swallowed hard. The same man he'd never met, but had signed his paychecks for years. A ghost-like figure, known for ruthless efficiency and a code of ethics that bordered on legend, was suddenly on his way. He wiped the sweat from his brow, ordering his staff to tidy everything and act professional. Inside, his chest pounded. Then came the moment. Through the glass doors, the sound of an engine, deep and smooth, had rolled in. The staff turned their heads as a black limousine pulled up to the curb. Bodyguards stepped out first, then opened the door. Out stepped the same man Collins had thrown out a day before. For a heartbeat, Silence fell across the bank. The clerks froze, mouths parting slightly. The young woman who had defended him gasped softly, realizing what she was seeing. Ethan's steps were calm, measured. He wore a tailored charcoal suit now, his hair combed neatly, his expression unreadable. A gold watch, the same one he had removed the day before, glimmered on his wrist. Mr. Collins's lips trembled. "Sir, Ethan's gaze moved over him, cold but quiet. He didn't need to raise his voice. The air around him did the talking. The guards opened the path toward the manager's office. The whisper spread like fire. "That's him. That's the owner." And in that suspended moment of disbelief, as Ethan passed the marble counter where he'd once been mocked, every face in the bank froze when the beggar walked out, wearing a billionaire's watch. The door to the manager's office clicked shut, sealing in the tension like a storm behind glass. The muffled hum of the bank outside faded as Ethan took his seat across from Mr. Collins. The manager stood stiff, his face pale, his smile trembling somewhere between apology and fear. "Mr. Blackwood," he began, his voice unsteady but coated with forced charm, "this is truly an honor. I had no idea you'd be visiting our branch personally. If I'd known—" Ethan lifted a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. The gesture was small, almost polite, but it carried the weight of finality. "You didn't know," he said quietly. That was the point. Collins tried to chuckle, but it came out hollow. "Sir, about yesterday, there was a bit of miscommunication. We get so many people walking in." Ethan pressed a button on the tablet Victoria had placed on the desk. The screen came alive with footage from the previous day. There it was in clear color and sound, Collins laughing, sneering, waving off the poor man with disdain. Every word, every gesture replayed in crisp clarity. The sound of Collins' own voice filled the room. "Try the community bank down the street." Ethan's gaze never left him. "Is that what you call miscommunication?" Collins swallowed hard, his voice cracking. "Sir, I was under a lot of stress. It was a busy day. We handle high-profile clients. I can't possibly know who's who." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "You don't need to know who's who," he said, his tone now carrying steel beneath calm. "You just need to know how to be human." The words hit like a gavel strike. Collins lowered his head, but Ethan wasn't done. "I built this bank on a simple rule," Ethan continued. "Whether a man walks in wearing a suit or carrying a shovel, he deserves the same respect. I started as a janitor, Mr. Collins. I cleaned floors in offices that laughed at me. People looked at my hands, not my heart. And I swore the day I'd own something of my own, no one under my roof would feel small." Collins tried again, desperate. "Sir, please, I meant no harm." "You must understand, appearances—" "Appearances," Ethan repeated slowly, almost to himself. "That's your compass, then. You see a person's worth in their clothes. Do you think money makes a man valuable?" "No, sir, of course not." "Then why did you treat me like dirt when you thought I had none?" Ethan's voice sharpened, rising for the first time. "You see, the problem isn't that you misjudged me. The problem is that you've likely done it to hundreds of others, people who came here with trust, with savings, maybe with hope. And you sent them away humiliated." The room fell silent. Outside, through the glass walls, employees stood frozen, pretending to work but watching everything. The tellers who once laughed with Collins now looked away, their faces tight with shame. Ethan's tone softened, but it only made his words heavier. "Power means nothing without empathy. I've sat at the top long enough to know. Arrogance is the fastest way down." Collins's hands shook slightly. "Please, sir, I've worked here 15 years. Ethan opened a folder on the desk. A printed document slid out, edges crisp, already signed by headquarters. 15 years, he said quietly. "Then you should have learned by now that experience doesn't equal wisdom." He took the pen from his coat pocket, the same pen he'd used to build contracts, sign acquisitions, and write checks that changed lives. With one smooth stroke, he signed the bottom of the page. "You're relieved of your position effective immediately," Ethan said, sliding the paper across the desk. His tone was steady, emotionless. "Today you didn't lose your job. You lost your character." Collins blinked rapidly, disbelief clouding his eyes. "Sir, please, I have a family. So do the people you've belittled." Ethan interrupted, standing up. And they didn't deserve it either. He turned toward the glass wall, pausing for a moment as the staff outside pretended not to look. But he knew they all were, and that was exactly what he wanted. He opened the door, stepping out into the main hall. The air outside felt different now, charged with whispers and unease. Employees watched as Collins sat crumpled behind the glass, his head buried in his hands. Ethan's eyes swept across the room. The tellers, the clerks, the security guard, the young woman who had spoken up yesterday. This bank, he said, his voice steady but carrying through the silence, will no longer measure people by the weight of their wallets. Starting today, we'll rebuild what arrogance destroyed. Then he turned back toward Victoria, who stood by the entrance holding a thin folder of new directives. "Gather everyone in the lobby," Ethan said. "We're not finished yet," she nodded. And as the staff began to assemble, unsure, nervous, curious, Ethan glanced once more toward the office where the fallen manager sat. His eyes softened, not in pity but in reflection. He had made his point. But the lesson wasn't over yet, because Ethan Blackwood had one more surprise for everyone watching. The hum of nervous whispers filled the bank lobby as Ethan stepped forward, his presence commanding silence, without a single word. Every employee, from the senior tellers to the janitorial staff, stood in a semicircle before him. The tension from earlier hadn't faded. It had simply changed shape, softer now, threaded with anticipation and unease. Ethan looked around slowly, his gaze resting for a moment on each face. He could read the story in their eyes, guilt, fear, curiosity, and for a few a quiet hope that this day might change something. Behind him a large screen flickered to life. Victoria, ever precise, tapped her tablet and nodded. Ethan's voice broke the silence. "Before we move forward, we must look at what we've become." The CCTV footage began to play. On screen the room watched itself, yesterday's scene unfolding in sharp clarity. Collins mocking the poor man, his laughter echoing faintly through the speakers, the discomfort of the young employee who had tried to intervene, and the moment Ethan quietly walked away. No one spoke. Some lowered their heads, others bit their lips in shame. A few blinked hard to fight the sting of realization. When the video ended, the only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioner. Ethan stood still for a moment, letting the silence do its work. Then he spoke. "Every customer who walks through those doors entrusts us with something far greater than money. They entrust us with dignity. Yesterday, that trust was broken, not just by one man, but by a culture that forgot the foundation this institution was built on." He turned to the staff. "That ends today. From this moment forward, this bank will serve everyone equally, rich or poor, powerful or powerless. Every person is a priority." The words fell like sunlight through storm clouds. The crowd exhaled, as if they'd been holding their breath for hours. Some clapped softly, others nodded. But it wasn't until Ethan smiled faintly and gestured to someone in the crowd that the room truly shifted. "You," he said, pointing toward the young clerk, the same woman who had dared to defend him the day before. "Step forward," she hesitated, startled. "Me, sir?" "Yes. Yesterday, when everyone else stayed silent, you offered kindness without expecting reward. You reminded me why I started this company in the first place." He turned to Victoria. "Effective immediately. Promote her to Senior Client Relations Officer. Let her set the standard for how our customers should be treated." The staff erupted in applause, genuine, relieved, emotional. The young woman's eyes glistened as she whispered a thank you that barely found her voice. But before the warmth of the moment could settle, the doors opened again. A woman stepped in, clutching a small boy's hand. She was dressed modestly, her face lined with worry. The room fell silent again as she walked straight toward Ethan. "Mr. Blackwood?" she asked softly. "I'm sorry to disturb you. I'm Clara Collins." The name hit like a faint echo. The crowd stiffened. Ethan's expression didn't change, but his eyes flickered with understanding. "I heard what happened to my father," she continued, her voice trembling. "I'm not here to defend him. He made mistakes, many. But please, sir, my son, he's in school. Without my father's job, I don't know how we'll—" Her voice cracked, but she steadied herself, clutching her son's hand tighter. "Please don't punish my boy for his grandfather's arrogance." The boy looked up at Ethan, innocent eyes wide and uncertain. For a moment the room waited, half expecting Ethan's tone to turn cold again, to deliver the kind of ruthless lesson power often demands. But it didn't. Instead, Ethan knelt slightly, meeting the boy's eyes. "What's your name?" "Lucas," the child whispered. Ethan smiled faintly. "Do you like school, Lucas?" The boy nodded shyly. "Yes, sir. I want to be a banker. Like my grandpa." The words drew a quiet ripple through the crowd. Ethan's gaze softened. He rose slowly, turned to Victoria and said, "Set up an education fund for Lucas Collins. Full scholarship, all expenses covered until he finishes university." Gasps echoed through the lobby. Clara covered her mouth, eyes flooding with tears. "Sir, I can't thank you enough." Ethan shook his head gently. "Don't thank me. Teach him that respect costs nothing but means everything." For a long, quiet moment, the bank stood in reverent stillness. Even those who had doubted Ethan now felt something stir inside them, a recognition of what true leadership looked like. He looked around the room one last time, his voice softer now. "Arrogance destroys from the top down, but kindness builds from the ground up. Remember that." Then, as if the day had finally released its grip, Ethan loosened his tie, stepped toward the glass doors, and paused. The city outside glowed in the afternoon light. He smiled faintly to himself, murmuring words only the nearest few could hear. "Money measures wealth," he said. "Kindness measures worth." And as he walked out of the bank, the staff watched in silence, some humbled, some inspired, but all changed. Behind him, the screen still glowed faintly. Frozen on the first frame of his test, a man in old clothes holding an envelope, walking into a bank. He had tested arrogance and rewarded humanity. Respect has no price tag.